Thank you for being here. This webinar is all about quality interactions and using quality interactions to support communication and language for all our children, wherever their starting points are. So during this webinar, you're going to see a few images. They're mostly images from the Sitting at Charles Dickens. And here we have a child in the 2-year-old provision who's working closely with a member of staff who has just spotted that he's shown an interest in an activity in the free flow environment, and she's playing alongside him to support him with his language development. So she's interacting with something that he's chosen to do. So he's quite invested in having a go at communicating about it by pointing, and she will introduce single words here and there because that's where he is with his language development. So how can the 4 evidence-informed approaches of shared attention, responding, expanding, and conversing support us in improving our interactions with our youngest children? That's what this session is all about. And we're going to break those things right down. So some of you might have heard of this approach, the Shrek approach. The Shrek word came about when the research school in East London and Brighter Start came together to look at the neuroscience around developing brains and came up with 4 evidence-informed strategies, which the acronym for is SHREK. So they are broken down. This is for you to remember, hopefully. The shared attention is the sh bit. The r is responding. The e is expanding. And the k is conversing. So for some people, that's a really helpful mnemonic to revisit those elements that are really, really useful in developing quality interactions with our children. And this image here is of a practitioner sharing that attention, looking closely at the things that the children are interested in doing, and her body is low at the same eye level as the children. So that's where the communication starts, just by sharing that attention. So what is this evidence that they were looking at? So being attached to a research school, they're also looking at science, neuroscience, and the neuroscience that was written up in Harvard was all around the development of the brain and how the neural pathways in the brain develop by being used. So our brains develop really rapidly in the womb and in the first years of life. And the bits that don't really get used much get clipped away. Those pathways we don't need to use much. So we can reopen them by using those pathways. If you think about different talents that we might develop over time, you know that we can develop new neural pathways. We might learn an instrument, for instance. But if you're not playing music or learning an instrument, you might not use that part of the brain, or not those particular pathways. So the science around developing your communication and language shows that you need to revisit those pathways and use those pathways regularly for them to become very secure. And what that means is that our to and fro interactions that we have with children are really crucial in making those pathways related to communication really strong. So that's a brief look at the science, but in one of the last slides, I've put a link in case you want to know a bit more about that science, or if one of your parents wants to know a bit more about it, the link is there. So the EEF, which is the Education Endowment Foundation, is an organization that looks at lots and lots of research, educational research, gleans the approaches that are really effective for accelerating children's progress, and then share that with us in reports. They have videos to exemplify these approaches. And what's really useful about it is that we don't have to trawl through all of the research. That's a job that they've done for us. And then our remit as Stronger Practice Hubs is to then bring those research reports from the EEF to you in a digestible fashion and make them relate to our practice. So this is why I'm using the images from our stay and plays and from our settings, because I was there in the moment and can tell you what was happening in these situations. So the guidance report that they created around communication and language, it's called Preparing for Literacy and Communication and Language. It emphasizes how much communication and language needs to be focused on so that children can access literacy. So the building blocks of that is for us to have quality interactions. And I really like this image because these three sets of parents with their children, adults with their child, who are having that shared attention with them. So the lady in the background is involved in a cookery role play with her son. The lady in the middle is at the craft table, and to be at the same level as the child, she's sat on the floor. And then the lady in the foreground is taking turns in building a very simple structure with her son, who's incredibly excited. So she's been very encouraging by helping him keep it together. It's very easy at a very young age to knock it down. So having that responsive adult who's taking turns in the to and fro communications there that involve a lot of actions is really very encouraging for him. It's gone really dark in my room, sorry. So how do we get these interactions right? These are 4 words I came up with last night that I thought really underpin every single strategy that we're looking at. The shared attention, the responding, the extending, and the conversing. To do those things well, you need to be really genuine. You need to be really child-centered. You need to be thoughtful. And you need to be really open. Open to the unexpected. A child may say something that is really quite tricky to tune into and understand. But if you come to it with an open mind, it's easier to hear what they said than if we come in with a preconceived idea of, oh, they're bound to say this, or we're looking at that, so they're going to talk about this. Often children will talk about something that seems quite random, but they're sometimes making quite a clever connection to something that happened the day before, or the week before, or a while ago. And we don't quite expect it. And I'm sure you have had moments where children have really surprised you with the observations that they've made. So the first approach is about sharing attention. And to do that, you need to build strong relationships. You're not going to be able to get close and low and have that shared contact with a child if they don't want to be close to an adult in that moment. It's not always personal. Sometimes a child doesn't want to invite interaction in that moment, and that's okay. we can revisit interacting with that child when they're ready. We know that their personal, social, emotional development is so important in getting them ready to be able to even have an interaction. Now, if we do those in a sensitive manner, they're more and more likely to want to invite that shared attention with us. We need to build the strong relationships, the trust, have that warm approach, listen really carefully, tune in to what it is that they want to do in that moment, or really notice what it is that they have noticed. And then it gives us a chance to build from there. So this was an example of an adult taking time at the end of a session to give that really intense shared attention, which involved eye contact. We know not all children appreciate eye contact or are able to have sustained eye contact. And it's not as though she was going to force anyone who was struggling with that, but because everyone was having a go, they were more likely to give it a go. And this is her way of building up that strong relationship. So next time they come to a movement and dance session, they will know who she is, feel that personal relationship, and are going to be more likely to follow the movements, to listen really carefully to when they need to stop. And I thought that was a lovely example of shared attention. And here we've got that positive relationship that has been built with that special adult who this child knows I can run to her for comfort when I need to. And I thought that was a very sweet moment. So the next thing that would happen is you responding. So you've got down, you've shared that attention, and then you want to respond to what you feel the child is pointing out. You want to find out what the child knows. How do they prefer to communicate? That's something that you need to bear in mind. Are you going to be using gesture, visuals, words, single words, whole phrases, sentences? The aim is to build on what they bring us. So after our initial response, we're going to expand by using a few more words than they did. Be aware of your body language at this point. We don't want to scare the child away. We don't want to confuse. So it's always underpinning everything that we need to be attuned and aligned with those children. You may simply narrate what they're doing. Talk through what you can see the child is doing. You're having a go at, I think actually here there were bits of ice as well as leaves. And the child on one side is trying to melt that ice with the paint and the paintbrush. So they're using the melted ice to help them get the water that they need to use their watercolors. So it's quite a lovely sensory activity there. So there's a lot that the practitioner can say to describe what the child is doing. Oh, I can see you're helping that ice to melt by stroking the brush against the ice. That might be too many words for a particular child. That might be pitched correctly for another child. You have to make that call using your personal judgment, having done some really good quality observations of where that child is with their communication. Oh, I went too fast. So the next one after responding is the expanding. I'm just going to switch the light on because it's suddenly got really dark. So the expanding is what I was referring to before, that adding another word. So there's a dinosaur on the side there. The child might say dinosaur, and you might say, yes, it's the grey dinosaur. So you're just adding one more word to support them to build on the language that they have. It may be that they say more words. This dinosaur's going really fast. I'm going to take it over to the cave. And you might then join in and say, oh, why is it wanting to go to the cave so quickly? What's the rush? So you're really going to adapt how many words you use, how much expression you use, depending on the child. Your aim when you expand is to get that to and fro conversation getting into a flow so that you can build a conversation. And what you really want to aim for is that you have at least 4 to and fro interactions with your children when you meet them incidentally in the free flow of your setting, when you join them in what they've chosen to do. I've used this image for conversation because there are also opportunities to teach the art of conversation when you have little group times like this one. So here an adult is doing some interactive reading, and that is when you invite the children's comments and you ask them to take over the reading of the story by commenting on what they see, and then they comment on what the previous child has just said. So the art of conversation involves children building on, well, listening and then responding, taking into account what they've just heard. So once they start doing that with each other, they're more likely to be able to do that respectfully, independently, without the adult being there. But what a wonderful opportunity in a little group to set those boundaries and explain to the children how it is that we converse, how we need to give time to each other to express what we want to express. How you just simply can't hear when 3 or 2 people talk at once. So the way to do it is to look around in your group, notice who's talking, and then a practitioner who's built the confidence over time works out that they can give very clear cues. They can say a child's name to direct them, to invite them in. What do you think? Where do you think the monster might be hiding? Oh, we've had a look behind the sofa. This monster is really quite sneaky. I wonder where they might choose to go. Why would they go behind the sofa? So you've got all sorts of ways that you can invite language in by using I wonder statements or, that looks interesting. It doesn't always need to be a direct question. In fact, to promote children's language, practitioners have found that it's actually really useful to ask fewer questions and make more comments. That's a little rule of thumb. I'll keep reminding you about because it's so useful to remember. Yeah, the last comment there is that if we are using questions, it's best to have open-ended questions. In certain situations where a child is still labeling things and using one word, it may be useful to ask those children quite closed questions so that they can feel quite successful in their one-word answers. But that's very particular. Oops. And here we've got all those things exemplified. A member of staff has come along and seen a child who's chosen to do a puzzle in the continuous provision. She's sharing attention. She's brought her body down to share attention with that child. And then has responded because the child wasn't sure how to complete the puzzle. And then has extended the to and fro conversation by asking her what she thought. So she's scaffolding in a way, rather than just making it too easy for her. She's getting her to think mathematically and showing her how she can check the amount by counting 1 to 1. The tiny little flowers that are on there. So she can put it next to the numeral 9. So she eventually worked out that there were 9 of them, and they worked out that the 6 was upside down, and that wasn't the 9, and then eventually they found the 9. So there were all sorts of little hurdles, but it meant that they were able to work together. And I think if the adult hadn't been there, she may have just walked away and not carried on with this activity. But she came away really satisfied that she'd completed this fantastically. So comment more, question less. Welcome children's attempts to communicate. That's really tricky sometimes when we're not quite sure what a child has said, but it's always good to have those little phrases up your sleeve like, interesting. I think that might be so, to see if it invites some clarification. Oh, not sure. What do you think? In the right context, even if you haven't heard exactly what a child has said, some of those phrases do work in the moment, and you may have more really amazing phrases that you use that would be really nice to share in this group. So use facial expression and gesture and adapt to the child's preferred style of communication. And then you need to wait. This is about allowing child processing time. Every child has slightly different processing time. It can feel really awkward sometimes to wait the amount of time that we need to wait for some children to then be able to respond. So that's something to bear in mind. Not every child, but try it with those who seem less reluctant to speak. Sometimes it's just because they're taking longer to process. So this image here shows an adult who has joined the play, and that was at the child's invitation. So she's initially shared attention with the child. She's responded to this child inviting her in to his very, very special fire engine. And they're going to go and put out a fire. So this child didn't have that much language. He was using approximate phrases. So putting words together, but them not really making grammatical sense. And she was able to say, oh, yes, I think we should go and put that fire out. Where is the fire? So she was able to rephrase things that he had said slightly incorrectly, and then help encourage him to give back the next bit of to and fro exchanging in their conversation. So the impact of this is that if we spend a long time developing our interactions and making sure that they're of a high quality by sharing attention, by responding, by extending, and by conversing, we're then teaching children those skills so that they can take them away and use them independently. And it's lovely to be a fly on the wall and watch how children then interact with each other. And these two here actually wouldn't speak that much with adults, but they had some really lovely exchanges. They'd had things narrated. they'd been exposed to a lot of language. So when they revisit this story that they'd seen with an adult previously in an independent situation, they were chatting away about it. And that's when you know, right, we've done a good job here. They're now practicing this language, revisiting this language, taking turns in their conversations, pat on the back. And that's when you know that the quality interactions are really paying off. And here is another situation where we have a role play, and this is a mixture of children, some quite boisterous. It was really lovely to see that they were very respectful of each other. It was very important to them what they were making in their little home environment situation. So it's a role play and they all have an equal voice within it. And it was just so lovely to see. And I really do feel that this is what comes from modeling quality interactions with our children. And here the children are turn taking in the conversation that they're having around their shop. So they've resourced their own shop. They've chopped up bits of paper. They've written on them to represent money. They're listening to each other. They're taking account of what each other is saying. And they're including everybody. So they're also rotating who the shopkeeper is going to be. And that is not being dictated by an adult. That is something that they are doing by having really respectful communications with each other. So in this image, I have shown two children who, when they first came to nursery, were really struggling with sharing that space with others. So if they wanted something, they would just take it out of a child's hand if that happened to be in somebody's hand. It wasn't malicious. It was just, I don't really know why that person is annoyingly holding the thing that I want. I'm just going to take it. So it's after lots of time spent playing alongside that these children have then been able to do just that independently, work together, take turns in the conversation, to and fro. One child's putting out his hand to ask for the next piece. The other child is responding by taking it apart and giving one piece at a time. Then he was also gesturing to the ones on the floor, and the other child would pick them up and pass them over. And it was so lovely to see. And they obviously picked up on an adult doing this with them earlier on in the week, and then decided to do this independently. And whatever we do, that is what we're modeling for the children to do. So we need to be really aware of what we're doing, how we're interacting, because that is what the children are going to pick up on. And here is the poster that is in the literacy report, the Preparing for Literacy report. And it shows Shrek in this lovely poster. But there is also one on the Bright Start website that they share. And that is a really lovely illustrated poster that is up in quite a few settings to remind people of these 4 elements and approaches. Take your pick. There's one or the other, but they're both very useful to remind us of how to have those quality interactions. So I would like to ask you individually what you think you will be able to focus on. I'm hoping that this is broken down enough that you feel, okay, well, I'm going to work on one of those elements. I think I do these ones quite well. This one I'm not so sure about. Or it may be that you've just revisited some ideas, and this training has given you an opportunity to focus a bit more on one aspect of your communication. So if I go back to the one we just saw, could you pop in the chat or come off mute and let us know, and just write in or say what you feel you've got enough information about now and you feel inspired to have a go at. It might be focusing a bit more on how we share attention. It might be that you've noticed a practitioner in your setting doing one or two of these things really well, and you want to have another observe of how they do that and what are the elements that make them successful. You might want to work on that first moment of when you respond and you follow that child's lead and you really tune into what they're doing. Or it might be that you want to expand, or you might want to start teaching the art of conversation. I see someone in the chat. Do fire away, everyone. Yes. Okay, Sammy, thank you so much for that. So if you're looking at the conversation aspect, keeping it flowing in small groups, there's an art to it. You just need to keep trying it, be patient, but also be really clear to the children that they cannot just talk over each other, because it's impossible for you to hear what's being said, and it's not fair for anyone. But try to avoid going straight to, right, I know how to manage this, we're going to use hands up, because that's going to block some of the children who wouldn't ever put their hand up or have such slow processing that involves too much coordination and thinking about what they're doing and what they're going to say, is a bit overwhelming. So practice those little cues. Oh, thank you. You've put the poster up. So conversation, keeping it flowing in small groups. Nagma, you feel inspired to tune in and follow their child's lead. That's fantastic. It's easier said than done. But if we are observing closely and really noticing what is making that child tick, rather than us assuming that they're going to like something in particular and want to talk about that, it's about being open. You've done a wonderful setup and the child's not interested in it at all, but they've seen a little ant on the edge of the builder's tray, and that's what they've noticed, and that's what they want to talk about, even though you spent 15 minutes preparing an amazing invitation for them. All they want to talk about is the ant. So yes, tuning in, great idea. There's the poster that if you click on it, then it will be in your browser and you can download that if you want to. So we've got another one here. For me, I need to give more quality time and interaction to the children. So that's really hard in a busy space, and I understand that. But what we need to do as practitioners is be really mindful of the children who need our support most. And if your time is limited and you can't speak to absolutely every single child having those 4 to and fro interactions, focus on those children who need it most. With the ones who are really articulate, have really quick, meaningful interactions, but spend the time with the ones who are finding it harder. I know that's a big ask because it's harder to do, but that's what we need to be doing. And the best way to do that is to tune in to what they're interested in. So that's great. We've got some really, really good actions here. Conversation. You like the idea of using a book, giving each of the children the opportunity to speak and take turns. Yes, some people use a talking object, which you pass around, and there's no obligation to speak, but it makes it really clear to the children who the speaker is. And I think that you can do in a different context. but it does also reinforce the turn taking in conversation. That's another idea you can use. So Lisa, you're saying that the interactive reading is a really nice idea that you're going to adopt and have a go at. So that's brilliant. Small groups, encouraging more conversation, etiquette. I love that. Making eye contact to let them know I've recognized they want to contribute. Yes, and I was talking earlier in the same training that you might gesture to a child and make really clear eye contact that they're next to speak. You might use the other hand to say, just wait a moment, to that child who's really eager, and the gesture may be enough to keep them waiting. So adding in all of these elements and adding some Makaton in the conversation rather than teaching it. That's a really nice idea as well. So that it's just flowing. It's a gesture that you use as you speak. And we know there are quite a few practitioners who are really fluent in singing nursery rhymes with Makaton. And that's a lovely way to expose children to the sign and the words. Putting the poster up and expand on the language by adding more words. Really great idea, Harpreet. So yeah, everyone's giving some great ideas. I hope that makes you feel empowered, that you know what you're going to be doing, and not overwhelmed that, oh my gosh, we need to do all these approaches at once. But it is useful. You've got the poster up, you can refer back to them. I think that's a really nice idea. Do be mindful. If you've got lots of things up, it may not be appropriate to have it up for the children, but you might want it on the inside of a cupboard for the adults to look at occasionally, or in your shared space, because this is for the adults. It's not really a visual that's of any interest to the children. So bear that in mind, because it's quite a good idea to keep your environments stripped back so they're not overwhelming, obviously engaging and interesting and calm. But this could be the addition that kind of tips that balance. So just bear that in mind. Okay, I'm gonna go through. Thank you everybody for being reflective and you know, having an action for what you're going to take back. I don't know what's happened to my arrows. They're not doing anything. Oops, it did work. So you've told me what you're going to focus on, which is great. Here are the useful links to blog written by Fliss from Brighter Start. She's written 2 blogs, one on quality interactions, which underpins the Shrek approach, one explicitly on the Shrek approach. I think it's quite useful to look at both. The Harvard write-up, which is very sciencey and very researchy for those of you like getting your teeth into research. That's the link there. And then we have got together with our partners and asked around, what is it that you do to encourage interactions with the children who find it hardest? And so we put together all of those top tips, and that's quite a useful one as well to refer to. And so I hope that has been useful for you. Oh, the last one is our very first blog that we wrote, which is also about 3 other approaches highlighted by the EEF that help support communication and language. Oh, we've got another chat. Let me have a look. Oh, yes, we have a feedback form here, which we'd love you to fill in. It's in the chat. So if you click on it now, you can fill that in later and it will stay on your browser. So, and do put in, there is on that form a place for you to write what you would like next, what other training you'd be interested in having. So thank you very much. We're happy to do bespoke training for you and your teams if you're in a larger team. Give us a call if you're in a smaller team. Explore our resources, and there's our email. And we'd love to hear from you to know how you're getting on, to know where this training is going, and you may share it with your whole teams. It may be the thing that's helped you take your practice to the next level. Thank you so much.